Omagyanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalaka Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha.
Endeavoring for material objectives, unnecessary talking of mundane affairs, being too much attached to scriptural rules and regulations, or too neglectful of them, associating with worldly-minded persons, and desiring mundane achievement. 6 good qualities are enthusiasm, confidence, patience, performing the regulative activities of devotional service, giving up the association of non-devotees, and following in the footsteps of previous acharyas. 6 activities of holy association are offering gifts and charity, accepting charitable gifts, revealing one's mind in confidence, inquiring confidentially, accepting prasadam, spiritual food, from others, and offering prasadam to others.
Then verse 3.
Lord, I do not find it strength to chant the holy name of Hari. Please be merciful and blessing me with a drop of faith, bestow on me the great treasure of the holy name of Krishna.
Krishna is yours. Going back to the subject, yesterday, revisiting it with more elaboration. Actually, I just saw that I was supposed to be. I'm a little out of. No, I'm not a little. I'm completely out of sequence. I was supposed. Yesterday's class was supposed to be today's, but anyway, it doesn't matter. It's not that one has to come chronologically before the other. So yesterday it was to marry or not to marry, and the general attitude and disposition of a Brahmacari. To marry or not to marry, the real question is how to serve Krishna best. In this regard, Srila Prabhupada recounted how he had asked his own Guru Maharaj, who was a Naishik Brahmachari, lifelong Brahmachari, who also said that if by having sex I could produce Krishna conscious children, I would be prepared to do so 100 times. And Prabhupada also pointed out, but still he didn't. So Prabhupada asked him that we have the example of the 6 Goswamis, Tyaktva Turnamashesha Mandala Pati Shrening Sada Tuchavat. They left everything in the world, the association of aristocrats, wealth, all these things, and accepted a very lowly position in humans, or a position of poverty. What's the next line after that? Bhutva dina ganesha ko karunaya kupina kantashrita. They after living in great opulence, all they had was a kupin, which we call that in English Brahmin underwear. I don't know how that name came, Brahmin underwear. And kanta, which is a patchwork quilt. In modern American culture, you probably don't even know what a patchwork quilt is. You'd have to go and look it up in an encyclopedia or something. It means that when the cloth gets old, you probably don't even know what that means either, because changing. But in some cultures, they wear clothes until they become worn out. In America, of course, it's fashionable to buy clothes which look as if they're worn out when they're new. So when they get old, they rip it up, and from the patches they make quilts. The comforter, they call it, I think, in America, right? And then they stuff it with rags. And so poor people, that's what they use to keep warm in the winter, for sleeping. So that's what it's really a situation of great poverty. So they accepted that situation of poverty, whereas Ramananda Rai, he left his job to join Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and he was given a full pension by his employer, Prataparudra Maharaj, and he remained in family life. He didn't give up family life. So Prabhupada asked Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, why? And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur replied, it's a question of service. What is more conducive? So in the case of Ramananda Rai, the Chaitanya Mahaprabhu didn't tell him to leave home and leave your family affairs. He was the the first of the 5 sons of Bhavananda Rai, so he had an influential position with his brothers, who were all servants of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So in that case, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu didn't tell him to leave, that he could stay at home and be a householder. So the question is how to serve. The same points Srila Prabhupada made in the famous purport about Gajendra the crocodile, in which Srila Prabhupada points out that why did the fight was going on between the elephant and the crocodile, and eventually the crocodile became stronger. The elephant became weak because he was not in his proper element. He was in the water, whereas the crocodile was in his element. So Prabhupada used this as an analogy, because one of his dynamic sannyasis, the news had come to Srila Prabhupada, one of his sannyasis who was performing externally very wonderful preaching work. The news had come out that while he was doing so, he was simultaneously having multiple affairs with various what are called Brahmacaris. So the news came out, and by this time Srila Prabhupada, it seemed, got used to that, because it wasn't the first occurrence of a young man who Prabhupada had awarded sannyas not maintaining the principles. But Srila Prabhupada, he wrote that if one is not fit for sannyas, then he can go to the Grihastha ashram. And the point is to go on fighting the crocodile of Maya in whichever situation is suitable for us. So it may be that some people are not suited for lifelong brahmachari life, but every devotee should be a brahmachari. Brahmachari means every devotee must be a brahmachari. If he's not a brahmachari, there's not a devotee, because a brahmachari means one who literally means one who moves or lives in a spiritual atmosphere. And of course, these, as I was saying yesterday, if one can avoid entering family life, that will provide the opportunity to be fully absorbed in the service of Guru and Krishna without any distraction. So it is intrinsically a better situation to aim at going back to Godhead. One point, not directly related to this, nowadays we often introduce ourselves, brahmacharis and sannyasis, as monks, which is, it's an accurate description. The term monk means a celibate, a celibate, what's the word? Monk? One who is dedicated, who is celibate and is living in the association of other monks for religious purposes, we can say this. Traditionally, monks, in the Christian tradition, they are different from priests, what are called priests. Priests are more active in the world, and monks, they are secluded from the world. And therefore we have the term cloistered away. Cloister means a monk's quarters. And it means removed from the world. So if we say someone's cloistered away, it means they're shut off. They've shut their door and they're not having anything to do with anyone. And there are still some monks like that in the Greek Orthodox tradition. There are some monks who are there, and in the Russian Orthodox tradition. And actually, by being celibates and being fully absorbed in praying, they actually develop some mystic powers, and some of the monasteries, they're only accessible by a basket on a rope. They're like way up on a mountain, and you can only, it's very difficult to come in or out. They're really cut off from the world. And the term monk, or in general religious terms in the West, they often, well, especially in Protestantism, there was a lot of jokes made about monks and the jolly friar, and then there's the Canterbury Tales, and there's so many stories of the secret tunnel between the monastery and the nunnery with the and in the tunnel you'll find the dead babies, because that's the natural result of communion, not holy communion, unholy communion between monks and nuns. So, and actually this very important institution in Western culture called beer, B-E-E-R, was invented by monks. And some of the best wines, some of the famous wines were also coming from monasteries. So, you know, there's pretty good monks and not so good monks. In modern Western culture, I mean it's pretty modern, the last 20 years, the term monk has come to be thought of also as the idea of Buddhist monks, or the Chinese and Japanese culture has become somewhat, there's some kind of superficial interest in that in the Western world. So when we introduce ourselves as monks, then people, they can relate to that somewhat. But we can use that term, it helps people to understand us. It's like we can say we're Hindus. We can say we're not, philosophically we understand there's no such thing as a Hindu anyway. But it's something we can say just to, we don't want to push it too much, but we can say that it's just something so people can kind of put us in a mental box so that they can start to understand or start to size us up as all. But on the other hand, if we make our whole identity like that, then we're trapped by that identity. People just put, okay, Hindu, they're Hindu, all right, now I don't have to think about it. They're a Hindu, they belong in the Hindu box, okay, very good. Pat them on the head, give them permission to exist, and okay, you be a good Hindu and don't bother us. So in the same way, the monk, there's the idea, maybe there's an idea of someone who's, you know, very nice and good person and doesn't really bother anyone. But we're not exactly that kind of monk. Devotees are supposed to be dynamic preachers. We're out in the world. We're not cloistered away. So we don't want to ourselves get too much into this stereotype of thinking ourselves as some people who are just kind of benign and withdrawn and don't do very much. But brahmacharis become brahmacharis not simply for our own culture. That was never Prabhupada's idea, that brahmacharis should be, or members of the movement in any ashram should simply cultivate Krishna consciousness for their own sake. But everyone in this movement is meant to be a preacher, and especially brahmacharis. It's not just, being a brahmachari is not just to escape from the world and not to have to earn a living, but it's a position of responsibility. Everyone should be responsible. This question of to marry or not to marry, everyone should be responsible. It's not just avoiding marriage because it's too much headache. But if one is not accepting the responsibility of marriage, then one should accept the responsibility of acting for the improvement of human society. It's not just an easygoing way of life, but rather everyone has to accept that responsibility. So if one is going to be a brahmachari, then be a brahmachari. Be fully absorbed in spiritual life. Otherwise, simply to be a bachelor, to be unmarried, that doesn't mean a brahmachari. Just to be unmarried. Just to avoid there are devotees like that who they can see, well, family life, it's too much headache, but not really very committed to serve the mission of Srila Prabhupada and the Acharyas. So that's not very laudable. There are others who so I get married and not get married, and they're like that for years and years, just floating on the mental platform. One should decide clearly, preferably by the age of 30 latest, which way am I going? It should be decided, because otherwise, if you're just kind of floating, maybe not, you can go on floating right up to the age of 40 or 45, and then get gobbled up by Maya in the form of the entrance into the Grihastha ashram. For such a person, that is Maya, because he just fell into it. He didn't enter into it in an intelligent and planned and Krishna conscious way. So better to get married earlier rather than later. So one should be very clear, have a very clear vision of how to use this valuable human form of life in a manner that is best suited for myself to become Krishna conscious and serve this mission. That decision is best taken in consultation with one's guru. Brahmachari is servant of his guru. It may be that there are cases where, at least I know of one case, I was told of one case where a devotee said to Srila Prabhupada that, Prabhupada, I want to take sannyas, and Prabhupada, no, you should get married. There may be cases where, I mean, just from my own experience, I deal with different devotees in different ways. If someone tells me that they don't want to get married, and they may be quite insistent, but I know that they're not fit for brahmachari life. They don't have that level of commitment and sense control. If you can see that someone's not very regular in sadhana and has not very committed to anything, and then you know that they're not fit for brahmachari life. It's a great vow. It's a great commitment. It's a great opportunity, but the great opportunity is not one simply of not being married and living in an ashram. It means applying oneself moment by moment, day by day, year by year, to be the endeavor to be fully Krishna conscious. And although a grihastha may have some kind of license for sense enjoyment, which that license has been redefined in the modern age, in our Krishna conscious movement, or the periphery of it. So nowadays it's considered normal for every grihastha to have a TV, and that's not just for watching Krishna conscious programs. It's considered normal and acceptable to have a TV, and the license gets stretched further and further. Brahmachari doesn't have any license like that. So if a brahmachari is attracted or wants those kind of things, then he's obviously not a brahmachari. Whereas we see in other cases there may be someone who's very, very serious preacher and very determined, but they're struggling. Actually, everyone's struggling to a greater or lesser extent. Well, maybe not everyone, but most we see that at least for some phase that most brahmacharis they go through. There's some internal struggle is there. Until we're completely pure devotees, then we're always we have to struggle with Maya. If we're not struggling with Maya, then we're overcome by Maya. But for those who are feeling it's they're feeling quite some difficulty, and it can be very difficult, no doubt. In these, in the Western countries, especially in the summer, which in Southern California seems to be most of the year. It's a warm climate. Then there are lots of unchaste women dressed in an unchaste manner, and it's not a very conducive situation for brahmachari. So we can expect that there will be some mental turbulence. But it's not necessarily just because there's some mental turbulence that one should crash the plane. That one can go through with this. And you can see if someone's serious to be a brahmachari, then they don't. It's not just because that there's some disturbance in the mind that we have to succumb to that, but rather take help, get strength, and go on. And we need, as I was saying, we need to re-establish the Brahmacari ashram. What are the principles of Brahmacari life? It's more difficult to be a Brahmachari now because that atmosphere isn't there. It's re-pioneering. It's saving the almost extinct species. So it's as more Brahmacharis come, then as that atmosphere is created of the Brahmacari ashram, then it will be easier for others to come, and they can take advantage of that association. That should be understood what the Brahmacari ashram is. It's an atmosphere of cooperation, helping each other in spiritual life, selflessness. Everyone's helping everyone else. Everyone is the servant of everyone else. That's very different to the modern self-centered way of thinking, in which everyone thinks, what's in it for me? So to join the Brahmacari ashram means to accept a different outlook on life altogether. The old or the way of thinking that we've had for all our lives, we've been trained with. So many wrong ideas. We heard this morning, it was quite revelatory, wasn't it? All those quotes from Freud. And all the ideas that we've been brought up with are just all wrong. We require to be re-educated. Like Srila Prabhupada often used to give his own paraphrased translation of the verse of Prabodhananda Saraswati. That he used to say that how to preach, you go to someone and say, my dear sir, you are very good, everything about you is very good, and then this person will think, what does this rascal want from me? He's understood my greatness, so what does he want from me? So then he asks you, what do you want? And you tell him, my dear sir, you just give up all your hogwash ideas and surrender at the lotus feet of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So like that, we may not, it's probably difficult for us to understand how deeply we have been conditioned by the modern or the current materialistic way of thinking. So Brahmachari means he's the servant of his guru, absorbed in hearing transcendental sound, absorbed in absorbing shastric understanding. If we don't absorb this understanding that everything is to be understood through Guru, Sadhu and Shastra, then we might end up, after several years of apparently practicing Krishna consciousness, find out that we have just been treading water. We didn't go anywhere. Treading water, you all know what that means? Treading water means you're swimming, but you're not really swimming. You're moving like this, but you don't go anywhere. You don't have enough. There's enough strength maybe to not get carried away by the current, but not enough to move you. So you remain in the same position. So it may be that we're superficially practicing, but if we maintain the same basic outlook, just like all these psychological ideas, then we may end up in the same position. That we're superficially Krishna conscious, but actually we still subscribe to the outlook of the demoniac society with all its wrong ideas. And we find that increasingly, that instead of discussing, increasingly within our society, that devotees, instead of discussing various points on the basis of Guru, Sadhu and Shastra, they do so on the basis of feelings, as if feelings are the feelings eva jayate. That's the feelings that's the main thing, and or they'll discuss in terms of modern so-called psychology, and it's a very common theory that devotees everyone's got, have you heard this before? Everyone's got so many contaminations, therefore they need to go through some course, or they have to get their chakras cleared, so otherwise they can't. You see, chanting Hare Krishna is very good, but you can't really do it properly unless you get, first of all you have to get your chakras cleared out, or you have to get all the hang-ups, what does Freud call it? All the things from your childhood, all those, I can't remember the word they use. You have to get all these things cleared out, and then you can become emotionally, you can become free from all these hang-ups, and then you can chant Hare Krishna. Of course, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu didn't say that, and none of the acharyas said that. Chanting Hare Krishna is itself the process for cleaning the mirror of the heart. But that chanting has to be accompanied by hearing. Otherwise, that chanting, and hearing means hearing the philosophy of Srimad Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, and understanding it very clearly, understanding who we are, this Sambandha Gyan, who we are, who is Bhagavan, what is our relationship with Him. Unless we hear this, we may be chanting Hare Krishna, but we may simply be watering our anarthas. If we conceive of Krishna according to any other understanding than that of Guru, Sadhu and Shastra, then even when we're cultivating, remembering Krishna, but we're remembering not actually Krishna, but a misconception of Krishna. And if we don't have a clear understanding of who is Krishna, then that won't be the Krishna who is to be surrendered to, and we won't have the understanding that we are to surrender to Him. So Brahmacharis, that was the quote that at the top of the poster for the Brahmacari seminar, that Brahmacharis engage in the unadulterated hearing process. So hearing, there's no actual chanting without hearing. Shravan, first comes Shravan and then Kirtan. First clear the ear, otherwise the name of Krishna cannot arise in the heart that has not been preliminarily cleared by hearing. First comes Shravan, then Kirtan. So, on to another subject. Practicing Brahmacharya in an age of diminished authority. Brahmachari life, there's another parallel with monk's life. The life of a monk in the Christian tradition is one of following authority. One voluntarily accepts to be subject to an authority which one accepts this authority is divinely ordained, and on that basis, with that faith, submits himself to that authority for the sake of spiritual advancement. Now, we live in an age of egalitarianism. The absurd idea is considered almost sacred, that all people are equal. And it's absurd because no two people are equal in any way. Maybe two people may be equal in height, just about, or weight, although that's fluctuating all the time. But people have different levels of intelligence. People have different levels of physical strength. To say that everyone is equal it's absurd. But there's this idea that everyone is equal, and that to suggest anything else is it's practically considered a sacrilege. Now, as Srila Prabhupada pointed out, let's talk a bit about diminished authority first, more. Previously, in the Western world, there was clearly stratified society. There's much spoken about the caste system in India, how bad it is. But actually, up until recently in the Western world, society was stratified by birth also. And those who in the medieval times there were serfs who were almost like slaves. In Russia, up until the end of the 19th century, there were serfs. And eventually the noblemen got more rights. They wrested their rights. The Magna Carta is in England. And then gradually the idea of everyone having rights. And first of all, it was for the noblemen got their rights, and then gradually other classes got their rights also. When was it in the Christian tradition that women got souls? I think it was only about 200 years ago. Up till that time they didn't have souls. And then they got sold.
Just about 100 years ago.
Just about 100. Yeah, it was towards the end of the 19th century also that women were granted souls. The animals still didn't get them. So...
Maybe in the future.
Maybe in the future they'll get souls also. So they got souls, and then they got votes, and then they got everything else. Then they got sex change operations. Yeah, it's pretty. They got all the way up from having no souls to having votes within, 20 or 30 years or something. So, the idea of just like we read in Srila Prabhupada's books, that not just Prabhupada's books, in the Bhagavad Gita itself, Lord Krishna states, what is that? Narang chaiva naradhipam. Among men I am the king. The king being a divinely appointed person. And he's the king because God wants him to be. So that idea was very strongly there. All of society was stratified. There's this idea of blue blood, that people who are royal, they have some special, they're very special and different. So that idea was there. The king is to be respected. The priest is to be respected. the teacher is to be respected, that has gradually broken down. The reason for that is because the position was abused. The position of king is to rule the people not for his own sense gratification. He gets his own sense gratification, but he is to rule them on behalf of God, just like a father cares for his children. But when that position was abused, was repeatedly abused, then people rebelled. And gradually the kings were thrown out and republics were established, or constitutional monarchies in which the king remains but not really as a king, just as a figurehead. And the Catholic Church in Western Europe, the Pope was supposed to be the representative of God, and the bishops and the priests, they were very much respected, but that respect diffused when it was seen that the position of the Pope and that of the bishops, it was more of a political post than one that people could relate to as being spiritual. And therefore people, they lost their respect for that, and there was the Protestant church emerged out of that, in which they attempted that even though in the Protestant church there are priests, but there are ministers, but they don't have the same kind of respect or position as in the Catholic Church. And it's just, the idea is more or less that, religion is a do-it-yourself process. You read the book, and you have your own relationship with Jesus, and there might be a minister who gives a lecture who's more learned, but he's intrinsically not really better than anyone else. And there's no special respect given to person. There's not the idea of saints, that anyone can become saintly. There's just the idea that, Jesus is there and everyone else is sinful. So it's very similar to Ritvikism, actually. Or Ritvikism is very similar to that idea that there's just, you read the book by yourself and you don't need you don't need any spiritual authority, Prabhupada's your authority, and Prabhupada's in my heart. And it's pretending to accept some authority without really accepting any direct personal authority. And not accepting that anyone can actually be saintly. If anyone appears to be saintly, it's just presumed that it's just a show, and it's just a matter of time before they get found out. So the whole basis of temporal or secular and spiritual authority has been undermined by misuse of that authority, and people in the Protestant church, or the various Protestant churches, they don't want to accept that authority. But then spiritual life becomes, like I said, a do-it-yourself affair, and basically a bunch of mental speculation with no authority. And even though they may make some authority, we'll find that the Protestant churches, they have been subject to practically infinite secession and splintering, because in the beginning they rejected the authority of the Pope, and then someone else comes along as an authority, and then the others say, well, why should I accept you as an authority? I'm just as good as you. You didn't accept authority, why should I accept you as an authority? And without that, there's no fixed understanding of what is Guru, Sadhu and Shastra. What is Siddhanta? It's just everyone has their own opinion. And any opinion is as good as any other. So we have similar problems in our ISKCON, because previously authorities in ISKCON were very highly respected. Nowadays that is less so. And there are historical reasons for that. But nevertheless, the principle of authority remains true. That, as Lord Krishna states in Bhagavad Gita, one has to accept a guru, one has to accept guidance, and particularly the Brahmacari has to work under the direction of a guru who guides him in every step of life. Now, if the Brahmacari ashram is kind of do-it-yourself kind of thing. Now, I'm saying this, but there are some Brahmacharis in our midst who are more or less independent in their activities. Now, it may be that for senior Brahmacharis, they are in many ways like sannyasis, who are given a lot of room to move. Sannyasis, they're giving, take your independence, take it and go and do something for Krishna. Not that they're independent of the orders of their guru, but they're considered to be like grown up, just like a grown up son. He remains under the tutelage and under the order of his guru, but at the same time it's not that he has to at every step take permission for everything he does, but rather it's expected that he knows he's so much in tune or so much dedicated to the order of his father or guru that even without being told he can execute that. So senior brahmacharis, it may be hoped that depending on what particular, again, the question of service is there. Depending on what particular service they have, they may accept quite an independent position. Independent not in the sense of being defiantly independent, but cooperatively independent. So that may be there. But especially junior brahmacharis, it's very much required that they accept authority and discipline, because without accepting the discipline that comes from being under an authority, they're never going to learn or imbibe sense control, which is self-discipline. Self-control, self-discipline, sense control, this is required. How are we going to do that? Because our whole practice throughout our lives has been one of indulge the senses. So we accept some external authority. You do this, don't do this, don't do this. Do this. I don't want to do it. Do it. Sankalpa vikalpa. This, I want to do it, I don't want to do it. This is the activity of the mind. To get off the mental platform, one has to accept an authority, and yes, you have to do it. You don't want to do it, that's not part of the equation. You don't want to do it, that's why you have to do it. We should accept, not on the basis of I want, I don't want, but I'm accepting this order because I accept that by following that I will overcome the variegations of the mind and rise above this platform of I want and I don't want, and come to the platform of doing what is required for Krishna's service. But until we come to that platform, then it's required that we have external authority upon us. And even if one has, if one is a more senior brahmachari, one may be more independent. Of course, that independence, that may come just because one is more senior, either by age or by number of years in the movement, and not necessarily in terms of spiritual advancement. It's also not necessarily true that someone who's been around the movement for many years is more advanced. It depends how much they apply themselves to the process. But more independence may be given just because, how long should someone remain in the kindergarten? But ideally, a devotee, a brahmachari should take Brahmacari training, which includes all the basic activities that Prabhupada gave us, strictly following the temple programs, going out on book distribution, Harinam, and doing all services uncomplainingly under the instruction of their temple authorities. And studying, brahmacharis are meant for studying, becoming absorbed in Shastra, not simply in an academic way, but learning how to apply that in life also. And all these, if you can learn to play mridanga, all these Vaishnav songs, all, of course it's impossible, there are thousands of them, but at least some of them. And in this way become spiritually rich. Giving up this comfortable way of life to lead an austere life, a monk's life, but to cultivate spiritual riches. So the authority needs to be followed even just to organize a society. When I say some devotees, as they become older, they may become more independent, but just to organize anything, to organize anything in this material world, it requires that there's some discipline. Someone has to take the lead and someone else has to follow. That's the way of the world. It's the natural order that the senior lead the junior. This is not my mental speculation, it's a statement by Srila Prabhupada. Naturally, some people, they are more qualified than others, and they take the leadership, and that principle should not be despised. That principle should be accepted. Now, within our society there has been and is distrust in varying degrees of various leaders or of leadership in general. I must admit I also subscribe to that, even though in various degrees, even though I myself am in the position of a leader somewhat. But at the same time, we should understand that it's a lot easier to criticize leaders than to be a leader. And it's difficult to be a leader anyway, especially in Kali Yuga, but especially in the present time in ISKCON, it's difficult to be a leader because of this general atmosphere of not wanting to follow any leader, or presuming that leaders are wrong, and even if you can't find anything wrong, it's presumed that they're wrong, but they just hasn't come out yet. It's like, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't kind of thing. So we can appreciate also that it's not easy to be a leader, and appreciate those who are taking that responsibility in the service of Srila Prabhupada. Often it's presumed that people only take leadership positions because they want to get some material advantage out of that, but that's a very uncharitable outlook. It may be true in some cases to some extent, and maybe in some cases to a large extent. But it's, at least as far as I see it, it's not true to a great extent in every case. So, yeah, there are difficulties with authority, the whole authority structure and system, but at the same time we should understand that we can function better as devotees, and especially as brahmacharis, by accepting a competent authority. If the authority is himself not self-controlled, then how can the brahmachari imbibe self-control? So anyone who wants to join this movement as a brahmachari, it's worthwhile to find that situation where your determination to be a brahmachari and your dedication can be properly reciprocated with, that the leaders are concerned with your spiritual life, they'll guide you and help you to come up. So find that association. Don't jump here and there. That's another disease. To jump here and there. That I joined in this temple, but I heard it's better over there. Okay, let's go there. Then you go there and you find something that you don't like, and then I'll go somewhere else. And hopping from here to there. There's no absolutely perfect situation anywhere, but it is very favorable. It's most favorable for our spiritual advancement if there are leaders who genuinely care for our spiritual advancement and are helping us to come up. And care means that they don't just, it's good, they should provide all material or physical facilities, but actually take care of us, see how we're advancing, give us instruction, help us through difficult times which will undoubtedly arise from the moment we join. Maya will be Maya goes into overtime when we try to escape. There are two phases of Maya. That's called the avaranatmika vritti, or the covering potency. Everyone is covered by Maya. And when one tries to come out, there's the vikshepatmika vritti, that she goes into overtime to kick us back, throw us back. So don't be surprised when we join that all of a sudden all these different desires and misgivings arise. That's normal. That's Maya trying to pull us out. So we should follow an authority. If we don't follow a competent authority, then we're following an incompetent authority. And if we think, I won't follow any authority, then we have to follow our own mind, which is a very bad authority. Although due to our own foolishness, we tend to think it is a good authority. But unless and until we are trained to act and think in a manner that is Krishna conscious as ordained by Guru, Sadhu and Shastra, then it's better to be under a competent authority. Now another important point here is I was talking about how the brahmachari is a servant of his guru. Maybe I'll get into that tomorrow. That's quite a big topic. You don't see our gurus very much, most of the devotees, and maybe I'll discuss that more tomorrow because it's quite a big topic. I'll leave some time now for questions, comments. Do we bring the cordless mic? Okay. Then please speak loudly. Look in the room at the person who's furthest away and speak to them. That's how to speak in a room, in a big room with many people and no amplification. Yeah.
Elaborating on the last point that you mentioned, that brahmacharis would follow the orders of a competent authority, but if there is not so ideal situation and if the leader is not so competent, then how should he?
Well, that's what I'm saying. If you want to join, it's a good idea to look around a bit, because frankly, here we are in North America, and most of the centers of our society in North America, I wouldn't advise a young man who wants to dedicate his life for the sake of spiritual advancement, I wouldn't advise him to join most of the centers, because most of the centers, they're not equipped to train or look after brahmacharis. There are a few centers where the consciousness of having brahmacharis at all is there. Now, if one is in of course, situations may change, and it should be understood that I'm speaking here in general principles. So the situation may change. It may be that someone who was a competent authority, they may go through some difficulty themselves, which affects the devotees under them, or they may be transferred somewhere else, or they may, for some reason or other, that the situation was good and then it became less good. So, like I said, I'm speaking in general principles, and life is more complex than that everything can be understood just from listening to a short seminar. Individual situations require to be considered carefully. So we'd have to see but sometimes a devotee joins in one situation, and then the local authorities want to keep him. But the reason they want to keep him is mostly because they have someone in the temple to do something, which they also need. But on the other hand, they have very little to give back, if anything, in terms of guidance and training and proper association or proper example. We find in many places that the person who has the designation temple president, they're never seen in the morning program. So I don't see why someone who's dedicating their life as a brahmachari should do so under a temple president who has no visible spiritual life. I would say that's good grounds to relocate to somewhere where you, at least the temple president, if you're supposed to be working under their direction, they should set an example, at least a minimal, at least that much example of spiritual leadership. It's not just some rule that the brahmachari has to follow the temple president. That's a rule, but the temple president has to himself set a minimal standard of spiritual application. Otherwise, what's the point? Our centers are meant for spiritual life. It's not just a set of rules and regulations that we have to run the temple on with. So you can quote me on that if you want. Not that my voice is law by any means, but I don't see any reason that a brahmachari has to remain committed to work under the direction of a temple president who's never seen in the morning program.
From the song,
yeah, please speak more loudly.
In the song, there is this one verse that one should not follow rules and regulations too strictly or too.
It didn't exactly say, it's not that one should not follow rules and regulations too strictly. That's not exactly what's stated. It's often misquoted like that. But it said that one should not follow rules and regulations. There's niyama agraha, which means being eager to follow. Agraha, which means eagerness. So one is eager for rules. One is not eager for Krishna. So one is attached to the rules, just like a smarta understanding. You follow the rule because it's a rule. One is more attached to following rules than considering what will actually please Krishna. Just like, for instance, it's a rule, it's an important rule that we rise early in the morning and attend Mangalarti. Alright, that's an important rule. That rule may sometimes not be followed. For instance, if you have an opportunity, I'm just giving a theoretical example. There may be some concert where there's a good opportunity to distribute books all night. So you shouldn't do it like 20 days a month or even 10 days a month, but occasionally, if there's an exceptional opportunity for doing a lot of important preaching, one may not follow that rule. You may break it once or occasionally for the sake of pleasing Krishna or serving the mission in another way. Now, if someone faults you, just see, didn't come to Mangalarti, that is not understanding the underlying principle that underlies all the rules, which is to please Krishna. But on the other hand, if one just flippantly rejects the rule, the rules aren't very important. The real thing is to love Krishna. So I love Krishna. I sleep every morning up to 7 o'clock, but I dream of Krishna. This is bogus. It's just bogus, that's all. Yes?
Maharaj, you mentioned the last point about somebody, you personally encourage too much of a new person to join some ashram in America. For me, it's kind of sad because...
it's sad for all of us, yeah. But that's why we got this seminar, to try and do something about it.
So my question was that, as Brahmacharis, we really want to commit ourselves to preach and to...
Right, that's another point. As Brahmacharis, you really want to commit yourself to preach and to be fully absorbed in spiritual practices, but often because there's a lack of devotees in the temple, then you're just like non-stop pot washing, floor washing, which is not bad. It's not to serve Krishna in that way, but then the hearing that a brahmachari is supposed to do, then he should bring that to others. He should be hearing and preaching and bringing others in. So that may be an unfortunate syndrome that you get into, because there's always... we have a lot of big temples in North America that are understaffed, and so if anyone comes along, okay, great. See that pile of potatoes? That's for you. And every day it's like that, and there's no end in sight. Not for peeling. I wasn't talking about eating them. That's just your perverted mentality. You're enjoying spirit. So, all you nonsense brahmacharis, you need the sannyasis to chastise you. Regularly, you rascal! So but again we have to consider each individual case. I mean, it is a fact also that the temples need some help, and you could discuss it with your authority if they're reasonable enough to discuss it, that this is the situation, I'd really like to be in Brahmachari association and go out on Harinam every day, and maybe they'll say, yeah, that's true, I sympathize with that. Okay, well, maybe let's try and see if we can get some more preaching going and make some more devotees, or they may say, well, realistically we're not likely to make many devotees in the next few months or years, so maybe you should go somewhere else. You can try discussing it with your authorities, although often it may be that with your temple authority, it may be that, they can only see as far as the next pile of potatoes, and in that case, here's a comment from a brahmachari who's now recently, in the last year or so, been a town president, so he knows both sides of the story. And he's going to tell us to finish in 4 minutes.
Well, I was thinking, yes, okay, you don't want to cut potatoes all day night long, you want to preach. Then you have to be determined to preach, like Prabhupada said. Prabhupada, we can see Prabhupada push devotees to dedicate themselves seriously. Like devotees, like Brahmananda was sent to Africa. He was on the verge of looking, and he did actually break with the principles of the association. But that's how serious you should be if you say, okay, now I don't want to cut potatoes, I want to go preach. Then you should be ready to sacrifice that much and dedicate yourself.
Very good point, yeah. Yeah, we're talking about devotees should be looked after, but at the same time, preaching means taking all kinds of difficulties and risks, and devotees should be looked after, but at the same time not looking for comfort. Even preaching means we have to accept discomfort, including mental discomfort.
Yes, please.
Is there some activities that Brahmacari shouldn't do? Because I remember
there are some activities that Brahmacari shouldn't do.
Go collect with stickers. And
collecting with stickers.
Serving in prasadam restaurants.
Serving in prasadam restaurants. Well, theoretically we can do anything for Krishna. Maybe I know myself, I was collecting for about 5 months, selling some records, and we were living in hotels, and it was horrible. I didn't like it, but what we were doing, we were collecting for vehicles for preaching in Bangladesh and Nepal. So that kept me inspired. And actually, we bought 4 vehicles, and for many years, those vehicles facilitated a lot of preaching. So, okay, that was good, but I wouldn't want to do it all my life. Yes, Maharaj.
Fundraising, just focusing on fundraising, gets you back into the food mentality, where it can help you get rid of that food.
This is an important point. Shall we discuss it more tomorrow? Because time's up. Or you want to speak more about it now, if Mahatma gives us some more time? It's a very important point, yeah.
There was some survey done not long ago, maybe 10 years ago, why people leave. And different reasons were given. And one reason was Brahmacharis and fundraisers, rather than preachers or big trains.
Yeah, theoretically Brahmacharis should be prepared to do anything, but at the same time we have to understand that Brahmacharis are not pure devotees, and they, like Maharaj said, it tends to breed a fruitive mentality. How much money? When you meet a person, instead of thinking, how can we give Krishna, we're thinking, how can we extract money? And although the aim is supposed to be for serving Krishna, if the fundraising is separated from preaching, then the money usually gets separated from preaching too. And the money becomes used for sense gratification. And we find that many projects which appear to flourish for some time, because the same spirit that devotees had for book distribution, they applied to fundraising, but then after some time the whole thing cuts because there wasn't a solid spiritual basis. So fundraising is best done very closely connected with preaching, telling people, even if we're collecting funds, telling people this is for Krishna. It is actually a big topic, but maybe it's not so relevant to Brahmacharis in North America nowadays, because it doesn't go on much nowadays, does it? Does it still go on? And Brahmacharis still being asked to go out with stickers and things?
No, I used to.
It's not happening now.
But you join something with the Brahmacharis here? No.
I'm not, there's hardly any Brahmacharis anywhere, and they're not being sent out with stickers and caps and things.
Just in Australia.
Still in Australia, in Sydney, yeah. Individuals are doing it, but that's not Brahmacharis in the temple, is it?
Those are householders.
Yeah.
For myself, sometimes as householder presidents, and they were raised with what you spoke about, with big, making lots of money instead of preaching, and then we have this huge facility. You go in, you want to distribute books, and they go, no, we got to take care of this thing. It's dilapidated. And so take care of it, paint it, this and that, and also go out and collect money with stickers. And no, I want to preach. Well, sorry.
Yeah, these are some of the difficulties we have of having these big temples with no one in them nowadays. But that's maybe getting a bit off the topic of the Brahmacari seminar.
Well,
is it? Or isn't it? It's relevant subject for Brahmacharis today. Well, that's why I say, join in it, get yourself in the association where you can be benefited. That's my line on all of this. Don't remain in a place where you are seen as an object to fulfill a goal, but where the leaders actually care for your spiritual advancement. I'm going to finish.